I think that's marvellous, that all my books are still in print. And I know that I'm very, very lucky. And as a reader myself, because I was reading on the Dart on the way over, I'd never go anywhere without a book. And of course, the reader is an active, and the viewer is an active part of the thing. And I'm often surprised. I remember some of the reviews of books I've written that I thought were quite funny, but actually people were reading them as dark realism. Somewhere along the line, things that we laugh at in Dublin weren't being laughed at elsewhere, but were being read in a different way. And that's interesting, And I've been to Japan once. The Snapper was on release in Japan, in art house cinemas. And the distributor brought me to the back of the cinema to watch it. It was wonderful because the subtitles go down the side of the screen. So I stood at the back for about an hour and watched these people who seemed, the way sometimes, even though there's no noise, you can tell there's something about the energy somehow. They were having a nice time watching. It was in the morning, Saturday morning. They were watching the Snapper, but none of them were laughing. They weren't laughing. And I designed the Snapper for laughter, really. Obviously there's more going on, but I would hope. But they weren't laughing. But they were obviously enjoying it,
Well, actually, I've read that Japanese audiences tend to be reserved even at rock concerts and things, so I wouldn't take that personally.
I didn't take it personally. I mean, I knew where it was, and I found it fascinating and really enjoyed it. So no, it was no problem at all. But it was interesting. But with something we think funny, isn't?
Roddy, I noticed when I travel abroad, we say from Ireland, everything we meet people is the commitments, especially in like say New Zealand or English-speaking countries. And then more recently, people have mentioned stuff like Once. And I noticed with those two films, as well as the fact that Can't Answer is in both. But do you think there's something special about Irish people playing music? And whenever we go abroad, people talk about Irish film or Irish music, and that rarely comes across in film. But it really nailed it in the commitments. Do you think there's something special about that?
I don't know if it's I think people do, even after the Celtic Tiger, we as a group of people, when I'm abroad, we seem to have a certain almost reputation. The people tend to like things Irish and notions of Irishness. They associate us with music and things like that. I'm not sure why exactly. I think you too have a huge contribution there, or whatever. I think the commitments and Once stand out in a way because I've been involved in film projects and I was on the film board for 4 years, and actually music is often the last thing that people think of. They're rolling and there isn't a mention of a song. And I read several scripts that were about music, and yet there was no mention of songs and nothing in the pre-production notes about how they were approaching getting permissions for songs and who would compose the music. It seemed to be an afterthought. And it comes across, I've been at another one actually that got the music spot on was it called Kisses? Lance Daly's film. The music was beautiful. Bob Dylan. But he went looking. There's a man with a sense of adventure and, creative ambition. So it struck me that you've been to a lot of Irish films that are 75% great, if that makes sense. And you're wondering what's lacking. And it's that bit of musical edge, that bit of music that, propels something like The Sopranos, for example. There's something about it. It's not just that, here's a great song. It's not just that. It's just part of the language. And I think maybe the commitments, because it is music, without the music it's nothing. And the same with Once, that they somehow have that extra ingredient perhaps. I'm not sure.
Is the gentleman over here, did you have a question?
Yeah, and then there's the man at the back there, yeah.
What
Cap.
your teachers hat on? And you see synergy going on from the leaving cert in relation to would you want to see it there?
Well, I haven't worn my teacher's hat in nearly 2 decades, so it's the dog ate it. But what I want,
You want the analysis of the culture.
jeez, I won't be in the room, so I wouldn't be listening. So probably no, I don't imagine. I believe at one point the Snapper was up for consideration and it was decided not to do it. That's grand with me. I don't, because even, you know, I remember in college myself, you know, reading a book, Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, and absolutely adoring it, and then, you know, it comes around, you know, you're going to have to, the following May, you're going to have to answer some sort of a stupid question about it, and it's less, one's affection for the book tends to be diluted somewhat, you know. So probably I'm better off without. But I have noticed that one of my books, Wilderness, which is written for young adults, as they're, I think, referred to sometimes, does seem to be an optional book. I'm not sure, I haven't asked whether it's junior cert or transition year or leaving cert, I'm not sure. But it's in among the school books now in Eason's. And I don't have a problem with it as such. And I know some of my books, Paddy Clark particularly, is on various courses in the UK, you know, because I get letters from students. And so, The Woman Who Walked Into Doors is a text in several medical schools. The medical students have to, because of her, what she has to say about the medical profession, they have to read that book. So the books are used for purposes that I'd never really anticipated.
Just a quick question. Do you think we've lost that type of job of
No, I don't. No, you know, it's different. I mean, things always, I wouldn't want to live in a museum, you know. So times change, things are different. But no. I was with a bunch of kids on Thursday, and they're still as sparky as ever.
Yeah. We were just doing school, I'm in education now, and we're doing like, you know, Don't Go Far. Do you remember that, like in 1985, like two young lads from Dublin, one was 6 and one was 10, we were headed off to like JFK.
Oh, yeah.
That way, you know. But it just strikes me, those two young lads, like, were personification, like Dublin.
Mhm.
You know, just wondering, same type of characters in your books, like, you know.
I think no, Dublin kids are Dublin kids. I think, but the extra ingredient that in like some of their parents aren't from Dublin, but the kids themselves are from Dublin. So I've heard kids swinging from Polish into English and back into Polish without drawing breath, and it's a fascinating thing to listen to. And what it'll produce in terms of literature, in terms of films and music, you know, we'll find out quite soon. So we live in interesting times. There's a man at the back who had a question.
Kevin?
And you were saying that the characters basically came out of your head. Do you find that there are you can identify people in your neighbourhood or people living their past life or significant people that they form critical elements of the characters you create?
People I knew. Sorry,
Do people that you are in your life or when you're a teacher, would big parts of that come into the characters you're writing because you know them?
No, I suppose you're limited by experience, and actually the most important person in that would be me myself, you know. A lot of the attitude, a lot of the lines, they're not recorded from any conversation, or very rarely from any conversation that I've listened to or heard. But they are conversations that I imagine and can easily imagine occurring, you know. The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, I couldn't have written it if I hadn't actually questioned my own attitudes and wondered about my own feelings about being a parent, for example, and kind of explored the possibility in what circumstances would I start drinking too much, and when would I start using alcohol as a crutch. And I started looking around, say, in the local pub, and more conscious of seeing what's the proportion of men to women. How is a drunk woman perceived as opposed to a drunk man? And so but it was me. So I think it's probably, you know, it's supremely egotistical, I suppose. But if it wasn't, basically, if I didn't kind of take the top of my head off and put my hand in and rub what I take out all over the page, it wouldn't happen. you know, which is not to say that the characters are me, because I've been asked, you know, the tedious questions. Were you ever in a band? Did you manage a band? You know, that's about Paddy Clark. Or did any of your sisters have a baby? You know, was it a very old man? Or you know, did you witness domestic violence? You know, all the stuff. Or, you know, did you go out in 1916 and shoot at the British? You know, all these questions. And the answer is usually no, in more, you know, 9 times out of 10. And after a while, even though I've written, there's a collection of stories called Bullfighting, which are about middle-aged men. And I didn't have to delve too deep into the research. I didn't have to go off looking at sociological texts to find out what it's like to be a middle-aged man. And some of them are based on, either sparked by experience. A friend of mine died some years ago. Horrible experience to witness one of your best friends dying. He died of an extreme form of asbestosis, inhaled when he was an apprentice. And it has an incubation period of 40 years. And it got him in the 40th year, basically. And I remember reading it, doing a Google. You're told don't Google, but I did. And it said 2 years at most, and that's what he got. So he deteriorated, and we went to the funeral. And there was a photograph, as is very common now, a photograph of him on the coffin. And it was such like a slap across the face, because it was a reminder that the frail, thin man with the oxygen that we had been going to visit, and occasionally he'd even make it down to the pub, wasn't the man, you know? And I wrote a story inspired by that. But very quickly, the fact that its spark was autobiographical became really irrelevant. It's about the words that you choose and the story, not about, you know, I've been reading manuscripts by other people, and they're there at my shoulder saying, oh, that really happened, that really happened. But actually, if it's not well written, it doesn't matter a damn, you know? It can be sentimental, it can be too vague, it can have all sorts of the wrong things, and it really doesn't matter. And you have to be brutal about it, because sometimes people are writing about very raw experience, but it's about the words, not the actual experience. So yes, some of them are, you know, I might have taken a line that I heard, or I might have vaguely some attitude, some strut, you know, this great attitude that I was immediately apparent to me when I started teaching in Kilbarrack. Just a great spirit and energy, and a great big, and I mean it in a cheerful sense, this great big fuck you attitude that seemed quite right and almost inviting, you know? It wasn't aggressive, it was, this is me. So I like to think that the commitments have that attitude. And in the original edition of the commitments, because I published it myself with a friend of mine, there were students of mine on the cover. But none of them were the characters, none of them at all. They just happened to be students that we were looking for an interesting mix and people that I got on very well with, and I thought might be up for it.
Johnny,
Yeah, I was just wondering, because I watched only a couple of weeks ago. I watched Paul Mercier's version, the film version of Studs, which I didn't think transferred to film well at all.
From the play.
Compared to play, which you don't play, it's staggering.
The play was amazing, yeah.
I was just wondering how you would feel, like, you took something like, say, Brown Bread, transferred it it's a single location, 3 actors.
Well, there was a suggestion years ago that Brown Bread be made into a film, and I said no, because I felt that when I was writing it, its limitations were, you know, the limitations of the stage were a virtue. All the big dramatic action takes place off stage, and Brendan Gleeson, who played in the original part, Mr. Farrell, would run on stage and say, they're after bombing the community centre. And it was great. Well, Brendan Gleeson being Brendan Gleeson, I mean, I remember he was in one of Paul's plays, and all he did was take crisps out of a bag, and people were in tears laughing. Just he's so brilliant. So Brendan would run on stage and announce these things were happening. But if you were to make a film of it, you'd have to have it somehow. You couldn't just have, you know. So I thought the limits that become a virtue would actually crumble away, and it would make a pretty crummy film. So I said no. I think some plays make good films, I've no doubt. And I think Paul's play, which is absolutely brilliant, I think it was hemmed in by lack of a budget, to be honest with you. I read I enjoyed it enormously. But the script notes were just his plans to depict football